Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a top 5 strongest weapons in the game that doesn't include Incarnons. If you want a list that is made up entirely of Incarnons, go check out this video, which is linked in the cards right now. The reason I decided to separate them is because most Incarnons just straight up outclass pretty much every primary weapon that isn't one in the game, and it is a lot more interesting to just not use them sometimes because they can get a little bit tiresome. But don't take that as these weapons are not as good as those Incarnons. They definitely are. I just think that it is not fair to place them in the same list because, you know, things like the Torrid, how are you really supposed to compete against that? It would just be number 1 on every list, and we all know that already. One thing I would like to note before we get into it is that I will not be using any sort of Warframe buffs like Roar or Eclipse or Zadas in this video. The only external things we will gain will be things like Arcane Acceleration or Tempo for fire rate, and then a companion which has Reinforced Bond or Tenacious Bond, which gives 1.2x more critical damage and 60% more fire rate. But other than that, I'm not using any Warframe buffs here. This video is going to be entirely just the weapons performing based on their own merit. Sure, a lot of things do get very good when you include Warframes in the equation, and I will have some things to say about that in the honorable mentions, but focusing on just the weapons for this video. To start off though, we have the Cedo Prime, which is Lavos Prime's signature shotgun, and this is a weapon that you are likely to find in pretty much every best weapons list in the game because it is absurdly strong. The base fire has it act like a very simple shotgun. It has a lot of multi-shot and it has a pretty wide pellet spread, and there is nothing too special. The damage is honestly fine, but you know, like nothing too crazy here. But the reason that most people use this weapon is because of its alt fire and a special passive it has, which is pretty much just Condition Overload or Galvanized Savvy, but built into the weapon. Alt firing this gun will launch a status-based glaive, which looks like this. Now, this glaive has some very powerful properties. As you can see, pretty much all of these enemies have at least 5 status effects currently active on them, which means that the weapon's passive, which gives you 60% more base damage per active status on an enemy, and this only counts individual statuses, not like if you have 10 heat, then you get 600%. It is only individual ones like heat, electric, cold, etc, etc. It means that the passive gives you a hell of a lot more base damage, and this is additive with other things like Galvanized Savvy, which give you 80% more per active status. So this weapon just fries enemies with the amount of base damage that you get on it. This status-based glaive will trigger each of the base H set elements, that being heat, cold, electric, and toxin. It will also then trigger any elements that you have modded on the weapon, and blast, which means that with a basic build, you're getting around 6 to 7 more statuses on every explosion of this glaive, and that results in the weapon with 0 stacks right now doing this. And even if I swap this to some Eximus units, which these are level 185 Heavy Gunner Eximus Steel Path enemies, the weapon still absolutely cooks them, as if they were, you know, normal star chart enemies. And this is just a great demonstration of how powerful Condition Overload style effects are in this game, and also why Cedo is just one of the best weapons, because even outside of using it as a damage tool, which it is clearly very good at, this is also a great primer weapon. If you're running around with a melee and you want to prime all the enemies up for your melee's Condition Overload, you just launch this glaive and then boom, all of them have so many statuses, and then you can go to town with a melee. But again, the gun itself will kill them more than well enough. Looking at the actual stats, you definitely want to build this weapon for status damage like this with the glaive, because the glaive has an obscenely high status chance. As if I forgot to mention earlier, you can also trigger slash on direct hits with the glaive, but the base fire has only a 4.8% per projectile. And even though the multi-shot is very high at 14.7, you really only want to use the primary fire to deal damage, trigger all these statuses with the glaive. The build I'm using for this is pretty novel. We are building for Viral, Electricity, and Magnetic with primary Blight in our Arcane slot. You can swap Blight for primary Frostbite. I just don't have a ranked one, but they're pretty much the same arcane. I would just consider it a side grade. And then if you don't have any of these, you can just use primary Merciless. That will be more than fine. But if you have Blight or Frostbite, I would recommend. Galvanized Hell gives you a lot of multi-shot. You kind of just need this mod on pretty much every gun these days. Galvanized Savvy is pretty much just the passive, but a mod. They are additive with each other, which sucks because if they were multiplicative, this gun would just be that much more broken. But even then, you're getting over 1000% more base damage damage from the passive and this mod together, which is what makes the gun so strong. Viral comes from Toxic Barrage and Chilling Reload. The reason that I don't use the Cold 6060 mod is because the reload speed here is really appreciated. You'll find that with a lot of these weapons, reload speed is the biggest hindrance to KPM, so bringing it down to 1.3 seconds from 1.8 is pretty nice. Prime Charge Shell gives us a lot of electric damage. The reason we use this is because we want to get as much base damage as possible, and seeing as elemental mods are multiplicative with base damage for your total damage, using a primed mod is best. And even though we don't really trigger a lot of electric with the primary fire, this is just the best way to boost its damage. Critical Deceleration and Primed Ravage are your standard critical damage mods, and then Magnetic Strafe will give us a little bit more fire rate and magnetic damage, which is very strong. Magnetic is a great status as of late because it just obliterates shields, but it also allows us to trigger electric on enemies like Eximus or shielded units, because if you break these shields when you have magnetic active, it will force proc the status, and that status will double dip on electric mods that you have on our weapon, making them twice as strong. Moving past the Cedo, we have our first Lich weapon, which is the Tenet Galaxian. Now, Galaxian is, in my opinion, besides the Torrid, and even then it might be better, the best beam weapon in the game. Now, what makes me say this? Well, beam weapons are one of the best weapon types in the game because they have a very buggy interaction with status damage. If you didn't know, multi-shot doesn't typically multiply your status damage in any way, because why would it? But for whatever reason, because of how beam weapons are coded on the back end, multi-shot will directly affect your status chance and your status damage, meaning that if you have like 4 multi-shot on a beam weapon, your status damage gets multiplied by 4, which is absolutely absurd and allows things like the Galaxian to, with no Warframe buffs, do stuff like this. So what is the cause of all the power that you just saw? Well, it really has to do with how you mod the weapon, which is why I'm going to dive into that a lot quicker than I did with the Cedo. Galvanized Chamber is pretty much a must-have on this weapon because of the multi-shot interaction that I just mentioned. But things like Prime Shred have cool and unique utility here as well. Prime Shred and Rifle Elementalist actually add Punch Through, and Punch Through on certain beam weapons interacts weirdly, where it will allow the weapon to generate more chains than it traditionally is able to. If I take off these mods and then summon in a group of enemies, you'll see that I'm only damaging the main one and then these 3 more, ignoring any possible chains we get from the electric status. Adding my Punch Through back into the weapon with these 2 mods and then running back over to these enemies, you'll see that I'm damaging way more. One, I'm shooting through these guys and I'm triggering on all of them. And then each of these individual enemies is summoning another 3 chains to the enemies that are nearby, which makes Prime Shred and Rifle Elementalist multiply your damage by a factor that is way higher than any other mod you could add, because hitting more enemies for just a single trigger pull is always way more powerful than, you know, getting a lot more base damage or something like that. So these mods are absolutely necessary to use. We're even striking as far as this enemy right here. Otherwise though, the build on the Galaxian is very, very particular. You're going to see a lot of electricity on all these builds because it is probably the best dot in the game right now, but I'm building for Viral, Electric, and Magnetic. Viral is the magnetic. Viral is pretty much magnetic, but for HP, and Magnetic is pretty much Viral, but for shields. These 2 elements are incredibly strong, Magnetic multiplying our damage to shields and Viral to HP, while Electric will benefit from both of them. And remember that when you break shields or overguard with magnetic procs on an enemy, it will force proc electric, which will double dip on any electric benefits that we have on our Galaxian, which is our progenitor. Running this specific progenitor allows us to use Malignant Force, which will combine with the Tenet Galaxian's base cold, and then also run magnetic capacity to get magnetic, electric, and viral. which is a very unique elemental combo that not many other weapons in the game can do. You definitely want to use a Prime Bane here to double dip on the benefits of electricity, and then otherwise it is pretty standard, nothing too crazy here. Critical delay and vital sense. Remember that our fire rate is coming from arcane acceleration on our Warframe. Sinister reach is not needed, but I like the plus 12 meters of range that it gives, just so the weapon feels extra broken in those bigger tile sets. We only have 3 elements on this build, which is why I'm not using Galvanized Aptitude and am instead preferring to use Primary Merciless. If you are using Gaptitude, if you have external priming from a companion or something, you can change Merciless for something like Crux, which gives you a lot more status chance because multi-shot will multiply the 300% status chance that it gives. And then ammo efficiency here also is really nice, just so that you have to reload the weapon less. But this is what a maximum damage build looks like, if not concerning any external buffs we might have. After the Galaxian, there is actually the base assist. Now, originally, I was going to use the Tenet Archiplasmor here, but then I remembered that the base assist, which is a new weapon, is honestly just the Archiplasmor, but better in pretty much every way. Base assist is a very unique weapon. Shooting it launches these like sound wave projectiles and also just looks really sick. But it also has a unique alt fire where you will send these mites onto enemies that will force trigger the magnetic and impact status. Now, why would you want to do something like that? Well, it is because the weapon has a unique passive where when enemies are in finisher range, you can alt fire at them to force trigger a mercy kill, which will then give you a weapon specific buff of 100% more damage and multi-shot. The damage is additive to base damage, but 100% more multi-shot is very powerful. You can also use this to easily trigger any of the Parazon mods for more ability strength or an 18-meter blind and everything else that that mod set has to offer. Base assist is also just very good because it has innate blast damage and a stupid high base damage, which means that your blast procs, which scale mainly off of base damage, will be absurdly strong. You can then use it with a magnetic progenitor to get magnetic, viral, blast, and radiation, which the weapon actually also has innately alongside blast. This might look like a little bit of an odd build, but Galvanized Savvy here is actually multiplicative to any base damage like Primary Merciless. Multiplicative gun CO is one of the strongest mechanics in the game, and it is very rare. It's why the Tenet Archiplasmor is one of the best weapons in the game, but base assist also has it, so that weapon is kind of just getting outclassed in every category right here. Critical Decel and Primed Ravage bring the weapon to very solid critical stats, while Chilling Reload and Toxic Barrage bring us to 96% status chance with a pretty high weighting towards viral and blast, which is what we want. And then Shotgun Elementalist will multiply the damage from the blast status so that it is even more powerful. I do have Prime Tactical Pump here, and that is just because the reload on this gun can be super long and super annoying, but if you want maximum damage, then you definitely want to throw a cleanse mod over this, showcasing the performance in the Simulacrum. And you know what? It is pretty damn strong. That innate blast allows the weapon to just kind of room clear for you. When you get those blast procs, you will just obliterate everything that is near an enemy. And the extra magazine capacity that you get from Elementalist is really appreciated on shotguns because they tend to have super long reload times. Even without Prime Tac Pump, the reload isn't that bad, but you don't really need the Bane mod, even though you do hit million damage blast with it. I just like the QOL that it provides, but definitely throw a cleanse mod on there if you want to deal as much damage as possible, because you do also have Primary Merciless, which will negate some of that reload time, so it is really up to you. One of my all-time favorite weapons in the game is the Phantasma, and this is a beam weapon like the Galaxian, but it is better for status damage in pretty much every way because it has absurdly high multi-shot because it is a shotgun beam weapon, which is not common, and it also has infinite body punch through, which is just ridiculously strong. I'll give you a showcase of this weapon right now. Even with 0 stacks, look at how much electric I'm triggering on this enemy alongside maximum stacks of every other status I have on the weapon. If I group these enemies together, yeah, 500,000 damage electric procs just for shooting the gun. This weapon is just as broken as Galaxian for these same reasons. Multi-shot will multiply our status damage, and because we have, what, like 20 multi-shot, our status damage gets multiplied by a flat 20, which is very, very powerful. And because the same happens with status chance, the really, really high status chance of 66.6% per projectile, which is around 15 or something, becomes a number so high that you will just maximum cap every status before you can even kill an enemy. The weapon's crit stats are honestly terrible, but it is a status weapon, so we don't really care about that. This is also a pretty novel build. Galvanized Savvy is additive here, but we do trigger 5 different statuses for a lot more base damage, which is why we can use Shotgun Vendetta. This gives us a lot more multi-shot and reload speed for getting a kill within 5 meters of a target. Multi-shot is broken for all the reasons that I have stated ad nauseum at this point, and the weapon has a very, very high fire rate and low magazine. Honestly, at this point, we are burning the mag in almost a single second, so the reload speed makes the already quick reload of 0.5 seconds take barely any time. If I get a kill real close to this enemy right now, look at how quick that reload is. So you pretty much never have a delay in shooting. And even then, the slight delay actually allows these statuses to trigger their damage effects, so it is not much of a problem. Bane mod, as always, to double dip on electricity, same with Shotgun Elementalist, the extra magazine capacity being very, very nice here. Primed Electric mod for the electric damage, and then Magnetic Strafe gives us more fire rate and also some magnetic, which is really, really good against shielded units and overguard. Galvanized Acceleration isn't super necessary here, but I do like it for the higher range. And Phantasma is just one of those weapons that you can throw on any frame and it will be stupid broken on. It only gets better when you include external buffs like Nourish, which allows you to then run Corrosive. And Corrosive, Viral, Electric, Radiation, Magnetic is one of the most broken elemental combos you will ever see. We're already getting electric procs in the 200s on these enemies before they even die, so you can imagine how much damage those are going to deal if you throw in any external buffs here. Now lastly, we have a weapon that is honestly not as strong as the ones I just showed you, but the reason I wanted to include the Fullman on this list is because it is a very, very easy weapon for new players to obtain that is also relatively competitive when you actually get into higher levels. This is a unique weapon. It has a semi-automatic fire mode, which shoots like this. And then if you alt fire, you can switch it to a fully automatic mode, which shoots like your traditional rifle. But the semi-automatic mode is pretty much just a shotgun, except it can use rifle mods, which is very rare. With no mods on, the weapon actually has innate electric, which is very, very nice, and a decent base damage. The semi-automatic mode having very good stats. This is a battery weapon though, which means that you don't actually reload it. If you look in the bottom right, you'll see that you wait for these shots to recharge themselves, which happens very quickly. You can lower that time if you do have reload speed on the weapon, but it shouldn't be that much of an issue. 0.7 seconds is not a very long time to wait at all. Fullman is another one of those weapons that has multiplicative gun CO, so you definitely want to use it here alongside something like Primary Deadhead. The reason we use Deadhead is because it adds 30% to the headshot multiplier, which the electric status can benefit off of, making the electric procs from this weapon stupid strong. It is very tight on mod space though. Even though we are going for a dot setup, I don't have the room to put in a Prime Bane. So if you do have something like Roar, this weapon will become significantly stronger, but this build right here is going to be more than enough for 90% of content you'll face. And if you are a new player, going for something like this will be way stronger than anything you'll need. Definitely something to strive for. And with all my stacks, you can see this weapon low-key kind of cooks. Definitely aim for those headshots if you can. The semi-fire is way better than the auto fire, but even then this mode is pretty respectable. There's just no reason to really use it when you can use the semi mode and, you know, do that to enemies. Some sort of grouping also makes this weapon very strong because it has punch through from Rifle Elementalist, and then electric is obviously an AoE status, so you get all the benefits from that. And yeah, Fulmin was one of my main weapons for a really long time, and while it might not be as strong as some of the other weapons on this list, it is definitely something to strive for if you are a new player because you can get it very easily. Now, some honorable mentions are the Aphentis. The Aphentis is not a good damage weapon in any capacity, but with this build right here, it is actually a very good utility weapon because it has a unique trait where if you alt-fire the gun and then get a kill in the radius that it then deploys, you will get more reload speed, fire rate, and ammo maximum. The minus 50% recoil is something I also didn't even know about. If you are using like a secondary focus build, if you run the Aphentis and then you just get a kill when you are standing in the radius that it has right here, you get a lot of benefits to your gun, Battlestar Might, as you can see. You actually don't even need to get a kill. You just need to be in the radius. So this is a really strong buff for doing pretty much nothing. The same thing goes for the Scourge Prime. The Scourge is another spear gun. They just like to give these weapons some really busted utility for some reason. But this one you actually throw at enemies and then it will create a bubble around their heads, which is like a mini magnetized bubble. If I get myself a secondary right now, once I've triggered it, if I shoot into this bubble, it redirects it directly to their head. You can see I'm getting Incarnate Charge even though I'm not actually shooting the head. And that's pretty powerful. Group enemies together, hit them with the Scourge, and then you don't even really need to aim for the heads, but you will hit them, which is very nice. You can also use it as a pseudo primer when you do this by building something like this on. Amalgam Serration for more sprint speed. You want a lot of reload speed so that you can recall the weapon back to you after you throw it. And then you get Corrosive and Radiation. Radiation will crowd control them. Corrosive will make them take some more damage. But Scourge is a very good utility weapon, just not crazy in the damage department. The Argonac is another weapon that you would use purely for utility. Wow, that is an ugly color scheme. And it is entirely because of a singular mod that the weapon has, which is Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger. I already have it on because you don't use this gun for anything else. This just allows your daggers to armor strip enemies very quickly. It works in the same vein that the Shattering Impact mod does, which is kind of confusing to explain. But if I group these enemies up and then start striking them all with my melee, you will see that they are losing armor. And yeah, they all kind of died because this is just a super strong weapon combination. But yeah, you can see that their armor starts to tick down. I don't know why it goes so slow and then gradually ramps up so quickly. Don't ask me. But daggers are very powerful with this mod. And then some honorable mentions in the damage category. The Kuva Sobek, which I just made an entire video on a week and a half ago. This is one of the best weapons in the game on specific warframes. If you go watch that video, which is linked in the cards right now, you will see that it is super broken on people like Saren or Garuda, allowing you to do things like this. Just nuke entire groups, and the same will be reflected even if I bring in a group of level 185 Eximus heavy gunners. So yeah, Sobek is one of the strongest guns in the game on these people in particular, which is why I didn't want to include it on the main list because it is only broken on a couple of frames, but the frames that it is broken on, well, it kind of makes it into the best primary in the entire game. And then lastly, if you just want a strong weapon to just run around and, not nuke everything but still kill enemies with, you can use the Gava Prime. The Gava is a really solid I just want to shoot enemies and kill them type weapon. It does require you to actually get some status stacks on it so it can deal damage, but once you have done that, the weapon does shred a little bit. This is one of my favorite guns to just take and do something like Exterminate or Capture where, KPM isn't really that important and I just want to shoot a feel-good gun. You can see that I'm getting red crits here because the weapon has a passive where every status proc you get will give you a 15% chance to make your next shot a red crit, which is very powerful and also super satisfying. Barrow Katir will sell this weapon occasionally. and it is one that if you're a new player should definitely add to your arsenal. But if you are a veteran, well, you know, sometimes it's just nice to shoot a gun that doesn't obliterate everything, but does good damage. It's a solid rifle, and that is why I like it. Thank you so much for watching this top 5 weapons in game with another 5 honorary mentions. If you want a list that does include Incarnon weapons, definitely go check out the sister video that I also have posted. It is linked in the cards right now again, and I will see you all very soon. Peace.